Whew. Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, I'm talking about the new album from BT, The Lost Art of Longing. Alright then, this was one I'd been looking forward to for obvious reasons. If you want more background on my history with BT, I've already reviewed all his previous studio albums. There's a playlist of all those videos linked in the description, but for those who haven't seen those, he is still one of my top 5 personal favorite artists of all time. His stuff means a lot to me, as I've made clear many times. It's been a long time since we've gotten an album of proper dance music from BT. His last album like this was A Song Across Wires in 2013, and all his studio albums since have focused a lot more on his more abstract and ambient side. All well and good. I mean, my favorite BT album is one of his most abstract and low-key ones, after all. But in the years following his Underscore album in 2016, I'd really been anticipating a return for him into dance music, and I couldn't wait to see where he'd end up. The main catalyst for my excitement for an album like this was a set of singles he released in 2017, called LSTM, 4, and Yahweh, 3 particularly meaty extended tracks that combined his trance and progressive house background with the abstraction and complexity of his This Binary Universe type material, and were all just absolute stunners. I really wanted to see those show up on a main studio album of his and just get a full album of material like that. Unfortunately, those singles turned out to just be one-offs not attached to an album. And there were a whole bunch of other one-offs that he's released after Underscore, which could range in quality. He had some really smooth progressive house cuts in The Noetic with Matt Fax, and later Atari's Lantern, which were plenty of fun, but didn't stick with me in the long term. He had a few less impressive and more basic cuts in The Upside Down, and I Need Love with Marcus Schultz. Those were pretty underwhelming. As was his collab with Armin van Buuren, Always, though that one was at least more interesting. But he had one more absolute killer track just last year with Ferry Corsten called 1997. That track was a bit of a punchy callback to some of his ESCM era styles, complete with the iconic MIDI piano solos. That was absolutely incredible. But again, none of these tracks were gonna be on a proper album. They were all just disconnected loose tracks being dropped while BT was hinting that such an album would be on the way. Which was pretty damn frustrating, not gonna lie. I did put together a custom EP out of 4 LSTM Yahweh in 1997 that's brought me back quite a bit. All those tracks are still excellent. But eventually BT finally announced the proper album this year and released 3 singles from it. And, I really liked all of them, but didn't love any of them on their own. None of them were on the level of this stuff from the custom EP. First we got 1 AM in Paris with Matt Fax, another very smooth progressive house cut that also felt kind of plain and standard. It was definitely a grower that got better with every successive listen, but didn't massively pop out to me as among his best work immediately. And alongside that, we also got The War with Irena Mancini, also co-written by Paul Harris and Cy Hulbert, which was also a major grower, but when I first heard it, all that came to mind was, why the fuck is BT making EDM trap music? I remember years ago when he made, I think it was a post on his Facebook page, where he was making fun of trap music and he put together, a basic trap beat in, 20 seconds. I would not have expected him to actually try doing that seriously. And I think I've made it clear before that, in my opinion, trendy BT is usually BT at his worst. That said, the track did have a really solid tune underneath it, and plenty of great attention to detail and random sidetracks. He certainly was not half-assing it, and the track's positives won out for me over any initial weirding out. And then finally, we got a 3rd single in Nail Hornet Wings. Oh, excuse me, I mean No Warning Lights with Emma Hewitt, co-written by her brother Anthony Hewitt. The most immediate of these pre-album singles definitely had some emotional weight and some really heavy and hard-hitting trance payoffs, even if it didn't really have any crazy sidetracks and just focused on its core tune the whole time. Though that one weirdly was the only one of the 3 that shrunk on me with repeat listens. I mean, still really good, but it started to feel more and more overbearing with each revisit prior to the album's release, and it did lose quite a bit of its initial luster. But anyway, the album proper. BT was advertising this project as supposedly his best ever work to date, which combined his trance and dance music roots with his more abstract styles, touching on the sounds of EMA, ESCM, These Hopeful Machines, A Song Across Wires, and This Binary Universe. He's even repeatedly said that he thinks he's well outdone these Hopeful Machines, which sounds amazing, and I wanted to fully believe him, but I have been around to see BT going out in full-on hype mode and end up overhyping his work quite a few times, promising more in his PR than he could actually deliver in the final product. So when BT was going on about this project, oh, it's gonna be better than these Hopeful Machines, I was like, okay, sure, BT, I'll believe it when I hear it. I certainly was not about to expect a brand new album to outdo one of my top 10 favorite albums of all time that I've known for years. This project could be absolutely incredible, and it still would not do that. That's just not how my brain works. And again, the 3 singles already were not mind-blowing to me, at least out of context. There was still the outside chance that this project could be a letdown, and even with all these long extended tracks apparently adding up to over an hour and a half and plenty of room for great stuff, I had to remain cautiously optimistic for this one. Also was not huge on the album cover, BT looking a little grody there, but that would not be the first time I did not like one of his album covers. Doesn't mean the music's gonna be worse off for it. I hoped this would really blow me away, but it still had that little bit of doubt in my mind. So, without any further ado, what did we get with The Lost Art of Longing? Well, as it turns out, it's freaking great and hit pretty immediately. And I can even tell where BT is coming from when he says this turned out better than THM. Now, having heard everything in full context, I have no trouble believing he is more proud of this. Well, not that I had trouble believing him before, but his passion in this one did in fact show. The 2 albums are pretty directly comparable, structured in a similar way, and this one's actually probably less trendy, yes, even with a little bit of trap influence on The War, and a little bit of electro house on The Light Is Always On, presumably care of AU5, but that's as trendy as this album's ever gonna get, and it's really not intrusive at all. You're not getting anything like Letting Go or Super Fabulous on this one. Also, if you were bothered at all the rock songs on these Hopeful Machines, you can rest easy knowing this album has basically none of that. I mean, I had no problems with rock stuff. I love Forget Me, for instance, but this one's all about the trance. It's one of his most straightforward and trance-centric projects in a very long time, possibly since Movement and Still Life. And the original version, not the US version. It's also kind of trying to have this kind of retro 80s tinge to a lot of it, some kind of synth-wavy qualities to the synth tones and production choices that BT's made, and the synths especially have a pretty obvious vintage analog quality to them. BT's giant collection of analog synth gear that he frequently flaunts is really being put to full use on this project. Was initially disappointed by the lack of a continuous mix, but after a while I stopped caring. I don't think it really needs one that badly. Now, of course, I do not personally enjoy this project more than these Hopeful Machines. Even ignoring that album's benefit of familiarity, which this project had no chance of overcoming, this project does have a noticeable lack of giant standouts. There's no track on here that really hits me like A Suddenly, or The Emergency, or Les Nocturnes de Lumière, or hell, even a Skylarking or Must Be the Love. Though mind you, it's certainly not for lack of trying. A lot of these tracks have the same depth and complexity and spot-on production that I love in all those tracks, and the tunes to back them up as well. They've basically got all the right ingredients to hit for me in that way. Just, I can compare a lot of them to other previously released BT tracks that do what they do a little better. There's a few tracks from this project that could theoretically scrape into the top 20 favorite BT tracks list video I did a while back, but most would just be honorable mentions, and definitely none would make the top 10. Or even top 15, honestly. That said, this album also has one major benefit to make up for the lack of big standouts, and that is, I think this is actually BT's single most consistent album to date. Like, just quality-wise, the one with the least distance between my enjoyment of the best and worst tracks. An album like A Song Across Wires may probably have better standouts, but that album's also a massive mixed bag that has some of BT's weakest tracks, like Surrounded, Calling Your Name, Lifeline, etc. Even an album like These Hopeful Machines has its weaker points, like Always, or the Psychedelic Furs cover, or Love Can Kill You, that while good, don't remotely measure up to the album's best moments. Or hell, even on this binary universe, the difference between its lowest point, See You on the Other Side, and a higher point like the Anti-Kythera Mechanism is fairly pronounced, even if both tracks are pretty amazing. The Lost Art of Longing, meanwhile, has no clunkers to speak of, and even the lowest points are barely trailing behind the best ones. There is one track that is admittedly a pretty easy go-to least favorite, If I Can Love You Right with Lola Rhodes and Wish I Was, aka Tidy. Also co-written by Lana Marie Spitaleri. Sorry. That one's kind of underdeveloped and short, doesn't have the strongest of tunes, and doesn't really show any new ideas that aren't already covered by other tracks on here. But even that track's pretty solid and easily memorable and doesn't weigh down the track listing in any way. I wouldn't skip it. I get about equal enjoyment to that I do to the previous Tidy collab Tonight from A Song Across Wires. And if that one were taken out, picking a least favorite on this album would have been nigh impossible. There'd be a couple of candidates in the second half, but none of them would totally feel right. Besides the one track which is only good, everything else is properly great. The pacing and consistency on this album is unrivaled in the entire BT catalog, and that alone makes it one of my favorite projects from him in a long time, and puts it in the upper echelon of his catalog. So yeah, how about we go down individual tracks? Got quite a bit to cover. So first we got the album's intro, Game Theory, a collection of plunking synth arpeggios and big guitar-like stabs for that extra bit of punchiness. Very Tangerine Dream inspired, maybe a little bit of John Carpenter as well. I'm reminded of the modular synth excursions that BT did on the soundtrack to Ittifaq. Feels like an epic retro sci-fi movie trailer. Also neat little spooky ambient outro at the end as well. Even if this track feels more like an album intro than something that stands up super well on its own, it's a great way to pull you in and get you hyped up for what you're about to hear. Next up we got Wildfire, featuring the vocals of Brenna McQuarrie, who weirdly does not get a featuring credit, as well as apparently co-production from J. Michael Allen Murphy, who I've never heard of and not sure to what extent he contributed, but whatever. But yeah, this is where the album really kicks into gear. Great tune and melody that sticks in the head. Running head first into Wildfire. Great punchy trance production that's super satisfying and hits all the right build-ups and payoffs. Oh, and there's even some orchestral tinges on this one. Some glockenspiels, some more interesting percussion choices, as well as a bunch of guitars thrown in the mix, both electric and acoustic, though neither particularly intrusive, as well as plenty of piano passages, and apparently a lot of fire-related sound effects in the background. This track delivers pretty much everything I'd want out of a BT track, both from being a catchy tune to having tons of details in the mix for you to pay attention to. Speaking of being detailed and complex, next we got Walk Into the Water with Matt Fax again, as well as Nation of One, aka vocalist Christy Krings and songwriter-producer Eric Johnson. They also featured on BT's recent disappointing collab with Armin. Needless to say, this track blows that one out of the water, no pun intended, stretching on for over 10 minutes and basically feeling like a spiritual sequel to Must Be the Love from A Song Across Wires, well containing the amount of progression and evolution I'd want out of a BT track of this length. The hook on this one admittedly isn't nearly as good as that on Must Be the Love. This one got a little too repetitive for its own good, though it certainly is very catchy. Walk into the water, you can't stop the wave. But it's the track's density and progression which is the real star of the show. You got beautiful ambient sections with maybe kalimbas on it and lots of whooshing water sound effects, sometimes pianos and timpanis and vocal layering to make Krings sound like a full choir, even more orchestral sections later on, and these... What the fuck is wrong with you? And these more atmospheric moments acting as build up into some skittery but hard-hitting electro-tinged trance grooves, and other glistening EDM drops that have very subtle whooshing sound effects, possibly trying to imitate ocean waves, I don't know. Definitely one of the best tracks in the bunch. Next up, 1am in Paris. This one's even grown on me significantly more now that I've heard it in context, especially since it's the only track that really sounds like this. Really do love the airy and atmospheric background vocals and the watery synth and piano progressions. Actually works as a good companion to Walk Into the Water, since this track has a very submarine quality to it. Feels like I'm going underwater and exploring a coral reef or something like that. And then there's The Light Is Always On, featuring co-production from AU5, as well as vocals and the core tune from Mangal Suvarnan, sorry. Another one of the most complex sounding tracks. You got more subtle piano and orchestral passages, I think you got some Eastern flutes in the background. Apparently that is a Bansuri care of Suvarnan. And you got several different sounding drop sections, one of which is all stuttery and punchy but still pretty openly melodic, and another that's all modern dubstep and electro house influenced. Not difficult to tell they've got AU5's fingerprints on them, though they definitely have the kind of attention to detail you'd want in a BT production. Technically, this is one of the shortest tracks here at just over 6 minutes, and it does zip by really fast, but certainly packs a lot of substance in that short time. And we got The War, which also immensely improved in the full context of the album. Definitely the wildest and craziest track in the bunch, as well as one of the most unique sounding. BT doesn't have any other tracks I know that sound quite like this one, I'll say that. The trap drop may have initially been a turnoff, but it really doesn't bother me anymore. Screechy and abrasive, but still heavily detailed and working as an effective payoff. Also that whole sorta drum and bass sidetrack with all the random breakbeats which switches between different sounds every few seconds. It's totally nuts in the most fun way. Also doesn't hurt that the hook that is one of the biggest earworms on the whole album. It's another one you started, you started. That one's really been following me around. And then we got the other over 10-minute track, Weltanschauung, which would probably be my pick for the strongest track on the album overall. Maybe, there's quite a bit of competition. It's just a solo BT track without any co-producers or co-writers or additional credits. And you can really tell he had fun with this one. He said in this big PDF he tweeted out recently breaking down each track and his creative process that this was what he imagined what it would be like if you made trance music in the 80s. And that's pretty much how I would have described it myself even before reading that. And there's plenty of fun sidetrack moments, all the layers of analog synth stuttering and going off into random places like one little section that sounds like a better produced Lego feat track, or another section that sounds like it's being played on some plinky prepared piano, or one part near the end which borders on micro house, but always paying off in gloriously huge retro 80s synthwavy trance drops, creating one of the most consistently hard-hitting grooves on the whole album, and finishing stunningly with all the synths sounding like they're glitching up and gradually shutting off one by one. What a freaking trip this was. The synths may have this sort of dated edge to them, but in a way that also feels like it's taking me into like this Blade Runner style future. So yeah, that's the first half of this album. Nothing even resembling a miss so far. The second half has more tracks that are overall lower points, but again, they're not lower by much. I Will Be Yours, for instance, featuring co-writing from Daniel Nitt and Jensen Vaughan, though not co-production, they just did lyrics. BT handles vocals on this one himself, though I was kind of taken off guard by how fuzzed out and processed his voice was. Kind of takes some of the emotion out of his performance. That said, the tune itself is nice and cute and heartwarming, and once I paid attention to the actual instrumentals, I heard a bunch of different change-ups in style. It's got rock sections with regular drums and live guitars, care of Johnny Radford. It's got breakdowns of the analog synths as well, with some weirdly funky slap bass lines in little parts. Got a lot more to it than a surface-level listen might initially reveal. Technically not one of my favorites, though there's tons of great qualities to it. Then after If I Can Love You Right, already talked about that one, we got one more solo BT track with no additional credits, Never Odd or Even. And this one is another big highlight. I will freely admit, though, that there have been listens of this project where this track just passed me by without noticing. It doesn't really have a hook, and what melodies I do hear are pretty similar to those on his earlier track, Yahweh, and I think I'd probably do enjoy that track more. But boy does this one pack a lot in its 8 minutes. It's even more consistently detailed than that track. You got an intro of random incomprehensible voice snippets, trance synth progressions going up against layers of sorta funky guitar licks, punchy analog synths going up against glockenspiels, chopped up YTPMV vocal manipulations and airy synth plucks echoing out way out in the background, more percussive pianos and ambient sidetracks with bell melodies, plenty of the usual glitches and stutter edits around the edges, all building up and paying off in the most satisfying way. BT's really making sure he's bringing his A-game on these solo instrumentals. The last stretch of the album is comparatively simple and doesn't go quite as all out in terms of instrumental detail or complexity. Windows with April Bender, as well as co-written by Lena Leon, it doesn't really introduce any new sounds we haven't already heard in this album, but my god is that hook one of the biggest earworms on the album, if not just the catchiest overall. Windows to let the light shine in. Another one that's just been haunting me and infiltrating my dreams. Torn on whether or not that's fully a good thing, but yeah, that one definitely has that strength to lean on. It's stuck with me far too much to be a least favorite. And next is Red Lights with Christian Burns and co-written by Johnny Radford. And I'll just be blunt and say that this is an All Hail the Silence track. It's a very straightforward new wave synth pop track with all the retro 80s synths and guitars creating that old school Depeche Mode and Erasure vibe. If this had been in Daggers, it would have completely blended into the crowd of other similar sounding cuts, and I would have been even more annoyed at how samey and bloated that album was. But yeah, it benefits massively from being the only track on the album that sounds like this. One new wave cut for the sake of variety hits with way more impact than 14 near-identical new wave cuts, even if there are probably quite a few tracks on Daggers that have better tunes than this. But yeah, very nice stuff and a welcome addition either way. And that brings us into the ending, which, yeah, BT stuck the landing on this album's ending way better than even on these Hopeful Machines. No Warning Lights got all of its initial emotional power back, if not even more than it had before after I finally got to hear it in full context of the album. Acting as the entire album's big, dramatic, emotional climax and most powerful tune, even in spite of not having as dense or impressive sound design as most of the cuts in the first half. The project was clearly building up to this moment, and it hits with all the heaviness and impact it needed to. The orchestral intro is beautiful, Emma Hewitt's performance is heartbreaking, BT's backing vocals are a great touch too, and those freaking drops were like being hit by a train. I mean, I may love The Unbreakable, but that track likely wouldn't have made much difference if it were moved to any earlier point on these Hopeful Machines. No Warning Lights, meanwhile, flat out cannot be moved from its spot in the track listing without making the album worse. It works too well as the album's big climactic penultimate number to fit anywhere else. And then we close with Save Me, also featuring Christian Burns and co-written by Johnny Radford. But this one is definitely not an All Hail the Silence track. It's just Burns singing over a full-on orchestral piece. And it sounds awesome! BT making full use of the orchestra here, all the string pads and bells and cello solos, while Burns' voice drives the emotional core, all coming together fantastically. It is way too short for my liking at only 3.5 minutes, and ends up feeling just like the album's epilogue, sort of. But it still hits more satisfyingly than any BT album closer has since, geez, probably Good Morning Kaya. Or maybe The Gathering Darkness, I don't know. Still really going out on a high note. So, that's The Lost Art of Longing. Now, I loved this album pretty immediately, and again, it's one of BT's strongest projects in a very long time. Though I've been going back and forth for quite a while trying to figure out whether or not this one crosses over into 9 out of 10 territory, it's right on that border, but I think at the end of the day, I just decided it comes a hair short of hitting that level. Not just because, for the most part, this project kind of retreads a lot of already proven ground for BT, but once again, the main trouble is just that no individual track on here sticks out to me as among the best ever in BT's catalog. Weltanschauung, I guess, might edge into that old top 20 video I made somewhere, but it won't go any higher than Forget Me. And, you know, Wildfire and Walk Into the Water have a chance too, but they're honorable mentions at the very worst. But other tracks here feel like they would lose some of their luster if you take them out of context of the album. See Game Theory, or Save Me, or all 3 of the pre-album singles. That said, even if this is just shy of a 9 for me, it still easily ranks in the top half of BT studio albums. This is not an album I feel like I can take as anything besides the unchanged complete whole. I won't likely be returning to individual tracks on here much, like I can with other BT albums. I gotta hear the whole thing in one go, otherwise it won't work nearly as well. And like I said, this is BT's most consistent album to date. The high points are not the highest I've ever seen from him, but the low points are not nearly as low and are really close to the high points. There may be no absolutely incredible tracks for me, but all of them are varying shades of great. The pacing is pitch perfect. It makes an hour and a half zip by, like these Hopeful Machines can make 100 minutes zip by. Also, even if it may technically not be anything new for him, I feel like a lot of this project is built out of fulfilling a lot of the potential that earlier projects of his didn't fulfill. Be it the inconsistency of A Song Across Wires, the redundancy of parts of Electronic Opus, the bloatedness of All Hail the Silence's Daggers. It borrows from all of these projects and some of his best work to make something special in its own right that has none of the weaknesses of those weaker projects. So, take that all as you will. I'm not sure if this is necessarily going to be my album of the year, I could see something beating it. But it's definitely going to be on the year-end list, and quite high, as you would expect. And the album's not even a week old yet. It could grow on me and end up in 9 out of 10 territory later, who knows. But of course I am giving it my full-on recommendation. Any fans of any era of BT need to give this one a shot. Heck, I think even fans of his from the days of ESCM and Movement and Still Life would be into it. It may have a lot in common with albums like These Hopeful Machines and A Song Across Wires, which turned off so many of those old fans, but I think this project reins in those styles in a way that's less off-putting or cheesy or trendy. It might really surprise you, who knows? But whatever the case, The Lost Art of Longing is just an all-around great project that once again proves why BT is one of my favorite artists in electronic music, and I'm overall feeling an 8.7 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.